this idea, what I'm realizing, because maybe my financial literacy is bad, but at age 35, it's like, I'm never going to feel secure unless I buy a house, apartment, whatever. I feel like I buy. I don't want to buy. I can't really afford to buy any place that I would like that's close to any place I'd want to be. But And I'm allowed to want to be where my family is and want to be where I'm from. By the way, everyone who's like, just like move to Nebraska. I'm not from Nebraska, and I'm still not going to be the only Black person in Nebraska. So like, just keep that, save that. I want to live where my family is in New York or somewhere driving distance and Amtrak distance. And the pressure to buy though is so great because yes, I'm spending an insane amounts of money on rent every year. And I have no equity, and I have no guarantee of middle class status. Forget the next generation. There's no next generation. It's just me, but I'm worried about old age. And I'm relatively well off in the grand scheme of America, but I feel there's enormous pressure to buy and get sucked into this property ownership system that then makes me feel invested in all these other downstream effects and wants to turn me into a YIMBY asshole.
Yeah, because our tax system is set up to give you all these advantages for being a landlord.
So much free stuff for owning a house.
And, Brie is coming from a very honest place here because the show does not have a retirement plan. We will never have a retirement plan because of my firm belief that there is no future.
Okay,
and also because of my hypothesis that there is no past either. I can't prove that, but I can prove there is no future.
All right. Well, on this point, though, I wanted to say, like, the childcare thing, I saw something really interesting the other day on the internet.
Yep.
A former Trump lawyer, a conservative named Andrew Kloster, tweeted, he retweeted Kirsten Gillibrand, who was saying, affordable childcare is good, saying money for childcare is a tax credit for wealthy white women. And I was like, whoa, this is what's happening now. He is trying to like ride the wave of liberal identity culture, which has said for years, universal programs are bad because they help white people, right? All the anti-Bernie stuff from 2016 through 2020 was Medicare for all is bad because it doesn't address maternal mortality rates. I saw there was an article that solar panels are bad for Black people. Jim Clyburn says free college is bad for HBCUs, right? And now you have conservatives figuring out that you could potentially get liberals to be against something like childcare by saying, actually, it's for white women.
Well, a lot of the J.D. Vance bullshit, which is, as we've established, is complete bullshit. A lot of that is, and this is what kind of, shuffles the deck for people, kind of scrambles everyone, is it's adopting a left critique. That is a real critique. That the economic pressures of the past 5 decades have turned single earner households into double earner households. In fact, friend of the show, Elizabeth Warren, wrote a whole book about this fucking thing. And it is to say that no, if you actually are anti-work, if you actually are anti-exploitation, then you should oppose this entitlement, because all this is a giveaway to employers, exploiters, that will compel you to enter the workforce and not stay at home with your children. And then, patterned on all of that is all the weird Bircher QAnon bullshit about, and they're also going to teach your children about Marxism and gender or whatever.
Yeah. Well, that's the argument Matt Bruning has been making to all of that, is like, give them a choice. Let people take cash.
Because the rich have the choice no matter what. Like, that's it.
Right.
At the end of the day, okay, we're all consumers in the market. At the end of the day, sorry, you're not a person, you're a consumer. That's it. Like, you don't get a choice. You're not a patriot. You're not an individual. You are not an acolyte. No. You are a consumer in the market. That is forced on all of us. None of us have a fucking choice.
Yeah.
And some consumers get more choices than other consumers. And that's it. And that's the fucking construct that we're working with.
And then that's why I feel so ornery and like upset about the idea that I feel like I'm being pressured into home ownership. I'm being pressured into like kind of the ultimate consumerism, like the idea of equity, like I'm sorry, it's just so perverse. The idea that the only way to have surety and equity in America in your future is to literally buy property. It's like the whole country is founded on the idea that only white men get to have rights. And we still live in a country where the property owning part is true.
It's an investment that will appreciate. And as well, if, none of us can predict what the next zip code is going to be, that is going to be very valuable to Russian and Middle Eastern and Chinese and Japanese billionaires. But by and large, in terms of a global economic system, owning American property is a pretty damn good investment.
I'm going to hack the system and buy in Japan.
You're gonna do a reverso on it. You're gonna do some jujitsu on it, that's kind of a long-term structural problem, that so much of this nation's wealth, so much of the wealth of what we call the middle class, is tied up purely in property prices that are not guaranteed by anything other than the market.
When I was in law school, I always am saying that law school is a radicalizing experience. Here's an example as to why. I was in a poverty law. I took poverty law my 3L year. And generally speaking, the people who self-select into a class like poverty law are progressives, whatever we called it back then. Liberals was not a charged term back then. And it was one of the least, microaggressing classes that I took, until this one day when we were talking about rents and housing property and like how hard it is, some of these same kinds of issues, and redlining, and obviously laws that have precluded various people from living in various places and taking advantage from home equity. And this one guy says, I think it's really unfair to have any kind of government policy that encourages integration unless white homeowners are compensated for the decline in housing value that occurs when Black people live next door.
Ooh.
Because that is constructively a government taking. Government taking being one of these things we learn about in property law 1 a year, where if the government wants to build a highway or whatever through their neighborhood, they can generally acquire your property or whatever through eminent domain, but they have to pay you for it if they constructively diminish the value of your thing.
Okay, now what's his name? I've got my canceled notebook. What's his name?
This guy was a conservative.
Twitter app, Instagram.
I think he went to
Facebook.
Regis, one of those Irish those Catholic, Italian Catholic kind of institutions. I don't know how he ended up on poverty law. I know nothing about the guy. He might be a swell guy, but these are the kind of arguments that people get a little bit. They get a little bit of knowledge, they can abstract it through a legal lens, and and then no one ever stopped. I mean, I stopped, obviously, hand in the air. By 3L year, I had found my voice and I had a lot to say about that. But the idea that there's a thing called value in a house that could diminish just because a person of African descent moves in next to you. And instead of challenging that system to say, well, the government should just pay the white person for having to take the hit for living next to a Black person. I mean, real galaxy brain stuff here.
Well, there is a history to that, because what actually happened after they got rid of redlining was the predatory real estate industry came in and they engaged in blockbusting.
Yes,
they used that. They used that. The fact that, yes, because it's all run by the market, that property prices will go down if minorities come to your neighborhood. They use that in order to force whites to sell their property at fire sale prices, and then flip them around and then sold them to first-time minority homeowners and gave them subprime mortgages.
Correct.
That they couldn't pay.
Correct.
leading to the fucking foreclosure crisis that happened in the 1970s,
So
which
this
led
was
to the
told-
arson crisis, which led to the fucking accelerated white flight, and led to all the fucking shit.
Yeah. So Heather McGee walks that through, and we just interviewed her obviously in her book, in her new book. Also, though, there's this show, I don't know if you've heard of it, called Them on Amazon Prime.
A new show? I don't know about that.
I know, Virgil.
New things.
I just recorded an episode with Leslie and T the other night talking about it. It's like 10 hours. It was a real commitment. I feel a little bamboozled. I don't know that I would have agreed to it if I had realized just how it's like torture porn, blah, blah, blah. But the point is that a central plot point, it's like a black family moves from the South to California after having experienced racial trauma in the South. And they move into an all-white neighborhood. They're sold this house by an exploitative blockbuster. And it's like a horror series, and there's a mix of a surreal kind of haunting that happens and psychological drama, and also like the real world racism that's coming from the people in their neighborhood. A melange that I found to be confusing and diminishing to both plot lines, but this is not a substantive critique of them. If you want to listen to a substantive critique of them, then you should listen to that episode with T and them.
Wait, when did they buy the house?
It's set in the 60s.
Okay. So it's about the exact same. It's about the exact thing we're talking about. Okay.
Yeah, and there's actually a really interesting scene. This is the only time I've really seen it depicted so explicitly in a fictional narrative like this, where you see them going to like get the lease, and how she like the leasing agent has the racially restrictive covenant in the lease, and they ask about it, and she's like, no, times have changed and you guys are really trailblazing and you don't have to listen to this anymore. And she kind of uses that as part of the pitch, like, white people tried to keep you out, but not on my watch. Like, it's a new world and you guys are heroes, right? And there's another scene where they show her in cahoots with like the big banks and even law enforcement, who was weirdly in the position of kind of protecting the black family long enough to get them into the house, guarding them against the racial terror of the neighbors just long enough for them to like stay in the neighborhood so that the white flight actually happens and they can drive down home prices. Yeah. And it's deep. It's like the historical aspect of the show is really interesting, even if I thought that some of the narrative points were a little sloppy.
Yeah, and this is before redlining was banned by the FHA.
No, in the show, redlining has just been banned. That's why there's still racial covenants in the contract, but they're not enforceable.
But they're unenforceable.
Yeah.
Right. Before they banned redlining, realtors would, when they wanted to engage in blockbusting, they would do things like hire a black woman to push a baby carriage with a black baby in it through a neighborhood, and then go to the neighbors and say, well, you got some, then, go to the white people who live there and say, you got some new neighbors coming in, just letting you know.
Yeah. I mean, we still did, when I was in law school, I was part of the Black Law Student Association had a social justice group, which I co-chaired my 3 year, and we had a program where we did that kind of door knocking to see. We would send black law students in to knock on a door and try to rent a property, and then send white law students in and try to identify discriminatory housing practices. And when I interviewed Bernie for our campaign podcast on our first episode, he says to me, I asked him like what kind of work he was doing with CORE when he was in college, and it was exactly that kind of work. And he's like, I don't know if you've heard of this. I was like, yes, we're still doing that. I was doing it in law school because that stuff still goes. My mom talks about when we first moved to New York in 2001, how she experienced that kind of discrimination at apartments that would ask her for all kinds of financial information that they weren't asking her white peers. And at first you're suspicious. You're like, is this normal? And she asked around, and like, I don't know, that's the way the world is. And so to live in that space and to then be told, Brianna, you've somehow been financially negligent because you didn't go and rent an apartment so that you could be middle class after jumping through every other hoop in the world. It's like, I'm tired. I don't want to keep jumping. I don't want to rent.
I
I mean, I don't want to own. I
you don't want to. You don't want to own.
Freedom.
Right.
I don't know where I want to live next month. We live in a different kind of economy, in a different kind of world.
Well, I'll tell you my position. Like, I don't want to pay rent. I don't want to do it. I don't want to own either, because the idea of owning something means I'll walk in a room and think, oh, all right, this is the last thing I'll see before I die. All right.
Virgil.
Don't like the idea of that. Now, there's this interesting thing that goes on, like the interesting narrative that goes on in the fascist right, that long and the short of it is, the elites are conspiring, a number of them are Jews, and they want you to live in the pods and eat the bugs. That's the long and the short of it. And
the train movie, Snowpiercer.
I get it. I never saw Snowpiercer. I get the gist of it. I get the gist of it.
Right.
I get it. It's the train's an analogy. I get it. Okay. Did
you see Parasite?
Oh, hey, we're not gonna keep doing this.
You didn't even see Parasite?
We're not gonna keep doing this.
Okay, but that's your milieu,
We're not gonna
Virgil.
I'm trying.
This isn't a black movie. This is an Asian movie.
Okay, Brie. All right, cat's out of the bag. Happy Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. This is. That's Brie's way of thanking me for my cultural contributions to American society, and you're welcome. You're welcome, folks. Here's the point I'm trying to make. I hear that crap about the pods and bugs, and I think, well, I already live in a pod. Like, I don't know what you mean by pod. Are you describing an apartment? Because I live in one of those. Like, it's a pod. It's a place that I sleep and conduct activity and eat and conduct activities in. There's a toilet and I piss in it. Is that what you mean by pod? Well, anyway, so I live in one of those, and it's not great, and I don't really care for it, but, gotta live somewhere. So I just don't want to pay for it. So if part of the deal from the elites is, you're going to live in the pod and eat the bugs, but you're not going to pay for it, then I'll take that deal.
Well, in Singapore, something like 90% of all housing is publicly owned because it's just too expensive to live anywhere otherwise. Like 90% of people rather live in publicly owned housing. And it's nice.
We were talking to Sia, like she brought this up and we didn't really drill down on it, but something that's interesting is community housing in Vienna. Mm-hmm. And have you ever seen pictures of that? It's very gorgeous. And they just basically went on this big public housing. They got hard on for building public housing. They built these huge developments, and what's critically interesting about them is you pay rent based on a proportion of your income. Mm. And so you have people of a variety of classes just living in the same housing building in like nice apartments. And a majority of Viennese live, in these buildings.
I think that a lot of Americans don't really want to admit that they like the status signifiers that having better houses than poor people, and better clothes than poor people, and better cars than poor people. Better college degrees than poor people.
You're not supposed to like public housing. It's supposed to be a scary, bad place. Like it's like prison. It's like something you use to scare people. Like, if you fuck up, you're gonna end up in fucking Section 8 housing.
But even if everybody had nice houses, like even if everyone got to live in Jenna Lyon's, brownstone, that was like the darling of. She was the CEO or design chief or whatever, top designer at J. Crew during J. Crew's halcyon run in the early aughts through like 2010 or something. Anyway, she's got great taste.
On this show, we rely on you for that information because I would never be able to pull that out my ass.
Well, she had this beautiful Brooklyn brownstone. She's since moved to Soho and has a beautiful Soho loft, but it was in all the design blogs for years. And, it's like the quintessential gorgeous Brooklyn townhome experience that now you can't get unless you have like $10 million. So, I fantasize about it. I love townhouses. I love, the narrow walk up, tall ceilings, tile ceilings, marble fireplace. Like that aesthetic is my dream. But you can't have it now unless you're very, very rich.
So you
or you move to like the Canadian border in upstate New York.
So you want to live in a brownstone is what you're saying. You want a nice, cute little brownstone.
Yeah, like to the extent that I still dream of like being wealthy, it's not because I just want to roll in a Scrooge McDuck pile of coins.
But you want to walk out your door and it's Sex in the City.
Yeah. I mean, I lived in a walk-up in New York and I loved it above a bar. I like the aesthetic. But that's all to say, why did I bring up Jenna Lyons and the brownstone? I think that people really, even if we all got to live in a Jenna Lyons apartment, I think that rich people would be unhappy because they want to have the exclusive right to that so that you can tell how much better than you they are. Right? Like, and Americans are really, we like to pretend that we don't care about class. We're not like England where all of that stuff is a lot more explicit. But we do it through consumerism. We have our class markers through consumerism, not like, I went to Oxford and how many lines of your family have been in this country club and my last name's Windsor, whatever. But like our version of it is, I think, and this is part of why the student debt pushback is about. People are mad not because I've quote unquote already paid off my student debt. They think that if people get all their student debt canceled, then they will lose their relative status position to the saps who cannot buy houses and cannot afford all the luxuries that they can now afford because they don't have to pay $2,300 a month in loans anymore.
It's an interesting point. We are obviously a society governed by conspicuous consumption. And yeah, you are correct that we, pretty much no matter who you are in America, we pretty much look down on this idea of a peerage system. Right? Mm-hmm. Like we think it would be moronic. Like if some guy came in and said, I'm the 15th Viscount of, Weatherford or whatever. And we're like, oh, all right. Here's a big
Schenectady.
Mac,
15th Viscount.
Yeah.
Toledo.
My dad owns an auto dealership. I don't know. But obviously we do have the same fucking, aristocratic structures, except we just don't formalize it in that fashion.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Also, it would be we are idiots and like we are actually charmed by bullshit like that. I don't know what I'm talking about. Just because we don't have the formal aristocracy doesn't mean that if some moron comes here and he's just like, I'm, the heir to the Habsburg dynasty, like we're not all horny for that person. Like we obviously are.